The Senate Foreign Relations Committee held confirmation hearings on the nominations for the ambassadorships in Mexico and Peru today. James Jones, former Oklahoma congressman and chairman of the American Stock Exchange, is President Clinton's choice to be ambassador to Mexico. The nominee for ambassador to Peru is career diplomat Alvin Adams. Mr. Adams has previously served as an ambassador to Djibouti and Haiti, in addition to several other posts in the State Department. The acting chairman for this hearing is Senator Christopher Dodd, Democrat of Connecticut.
Committee will come to order. The committee meets today for the purpose of considering Mr. James R. Jones of Oklahoma to be ambassador to Mexico, and Ambassador Alvin P. Adams, Jr. of Virginia, to be ambassador to the Republic of Peru. And let me welcome both of you here. I had the pleasure of serving in the House 2 centuries ago, it seems, with Jim Jones and a dear and good friend. And Ambassador Adams, we don't know each other that well, but you've had a very distinguished career and record in serving in the Foreign Service of this country, having served as our ambassador in 2 other locations in not easy spots, in Djibouti and of course most recently in Haiti, and now having received the honor of being asked by our president to represent our country in Peru, a troubled spot as well. And Jim, I don't need to tell you, obviously Mexico is such a good friend and vital ally to the United States. No other example like it anywhere in the world. Only 2 others, I guess, where a highly developed nation shares a common border with a less developed country. The other examples being Israel and its neighbors, and South Africa and its neighbors. And despite what difficulties, and there are some, it's a remarkably fine relationship. I have the highest regard and respect for President Salinas and the efforts that he's making, and obviously NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, is going to be the most critical issue that has to be resolved in the coming weeks and months. And so ongoing, there are numerous other issues which we can get into here this afternoon, but I want to commend both of you for accepting the invitation of the President, and commend the President as well for selecting 2 such fine individuals to represent our country. Jim, you're here with 2 of my colleagues and your former colleagues from Oklahoma, Senator Nichols, Senator Boren, and I'm going to turn to them momentarily. Before I do, Senator Coverdale, I think has a few opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As before, I think I'm going to enter into the record 2 statements with regard to these 2 nominees. Let me just say to Congressman Jones, you are coming to this post. I guess you could say that it's always been a very critical post insofar as relations between the United States and Mexico are concerned, but this is a uniquely critical period in terms of the hemisphere and the particular issues confronting the 2 countries. I'm hoping that in your opening statement and in the questions that might follow, we can address some of your thoughts with regard to NAFTA, the particular issues that we're dealing with here in the United States, and your feelings with regard to what would happen should it not be successful. The drug issue on our border, and equally important, the issue of immigration. As you know, there are conditions that have created certain tensions between the 2 countries, particularly among our southwestern states. And I would hope that you might take a moment or 2 to address your feelings about that issue as well as the other 2. With regard to Ambassador Adams, let me say that I have to be among only a few Americans that visited Djibouti, and so I laud you for the service that you gave us in that unique spot in the world. You too are coming to a position of significant importance, because in this hemisphere we're engaged in the ongoing discussion of democracy. And as you know, and the world knows, you're coming to a post where the challenges of what constitutes the appropriate process of instituting democracy is a question in Peru. And I would hope that you would comment during your discussion and question and answer period on the issues related to the progress you feel may or may not have been made, and your general view as to what the position of the United States ought to be with regard to the unique conditions and the unique pressures on the definition of democracy in our hemisphere that Peru poses. Mr. Chairman, with those opening comments, I would turn the chair to you.
Thank you very much. Before asking our two colleagues for their opening thoughts, I'd like to ask both of you to introduce any members of your family that you may have present. This is always a very special day, and having members of your family along with you is a special treat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have two members of our family here. My wife of 25 years, Olivia Barclay Jones.
I know Olivia very well. Nice to see you again.
And Adam Jones, our younger son, who is here unusually with a tie on today. And,
You'll kill him for that when you get home. You'll pay for that dearly, and you ought to, too.
That's right. And our older son, Jeffrey, is in New York working.
So you have a tie on today, too? Let's make this equal.
Let's hope so. That's right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ambassador Adams?
Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce my wife, my aunt, of 20 years of marriage and of hardship and of pleasures and of honor to serve the country overseas together with me. She was recognized for her volunteer spirit by the Secretary of State a few years ago for her work in Haiti. And next to her is my son, Lex Adams, who is a junior at Connecticut College, is studying international relations and is thinking of getting the same business as I'm in, despite my best advice, sir.
Highest form of flattery. The highest form of flattery.
One final comment. There's a third member of the family who can't be here with us today. My older son, a sad story. He gave his life for the country on the USS Iowa in 1989, cabin number 2. Anyway, his name was Tom, and I'm still very proud of him.
Absolutely. And your dad, they gave you that tie.
That's my tie. Yes, right, sir.
Well, very good. Jim, why don't you, David, I guess we'll begin with you, and then Don.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Senator Coverdale. As both of you have indicated, this appointment is an extremely important one, especially at this moment in time as the relationship between ourselves and the government of Mexico are really at one of the most important points in terms of that relationship over many, many years. With the knowledge that both of you have in terms of our relationship with that country, Mr. Chairman, your long association with Central America and South America, and particularly also with Mexico, being such a great student of that relationship, and Senator Coverdale, your experience, particularly during the period of time that you were director of the Peace Corps with the entire region, leads me to make this statement not lightly, but I believe that the President could not have appointed a better person to this post at this time. He's the right person, the right post, at the right time. Jim Jones has long experience in government service, as you all know. He has experience in the private sector as well. He understands the economic relationship between our two countries and the impact of that relationship. He currently is serving as Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the American Stock Exchange in New York. But as the Chairman has just indicated, most of us know him from his service, his public service in the Congress, and before that in the executive branch. He's a graduate of the University of Oklahoma and a graduate of Georgetown University Law School. Shortly during or after his graduation from law school, in fact, during part of the time that he was still in law school, he came to work in the U.S. House of Representatives as a legislative assistant to Congressman Ed Edmondson of Oklahoma. And early on, people in Oklahoma came to know Jim Jones for his ability, his efficiency, his dedication to public service, and his willingness to work hard. People knew that if they wanted to get something done in that office, if they wanted to get the attention of Congressman Edmondson, they could call up one of his younger staffers, Jim Jones, and get the job done. He was spotted by another person in Washington at that time for his talents and his good staff work by the President of the United States, Lyndon Johnson, asked to come to the White House and serve as a special assistant to the President, and then later as the Assistant Appointments Secretary to the President, where he really controlled the President's daily schedule. And again,
no easy task.
No easy task, and especially for Lyndon Johnson. And I imagine not a task that ended at 5 o'clock in the evening, or that didn't commence before 8 o'clock in the morning either. He performed exceptionally well in that task. He returned back to his home state. He came back to Tulsa, where he practiced law and was in private business. And then he ran for the U.S. House of Representatives successfully, and was elected in 1973 and served 14 years in the House of Representatives. Let me say that he served from a district that was traditionally a Republican district. So to say that Jim Jones had to have strong bipartisan support in order to have compiled 14 years of service in the Congress from that particular district is an understatement. He was widely admired by those in both parties in that congressional district, widely admired by the business community for his understanding and of business and its needs and what it takes to have economic development in our country. While he served in the Congress, he served on the Ways and Means Committee. He chaired the Subcommittee on Social Security, a very important task from 1985 to 87. He brought about some of the earlier cost-saving reforms in the Social Security system during that period of time. He then became chairman of the House Budget Committee, and he served for 4 years as chairman of the House Budget Committee. And I suppose that's when he first gained most national prominence. And he gained prominence as a person who looked far into the future instead of just next week and at the polls. He looked into the future to see what needed to be done to make structural changes to bring down the budget deficits and restore our economic health. And without overstating it, and I remember some of those proposals that were very, very courageous at the time, if we had all listened in the executive branch and in Congress and both parties to some of those proposals that were made by Chairman Jim Jones, Chairman of the House Budget Committee, we would not be facing the high budget deficits. We would not be in the midst of the very difficult task in which we now find ourselves of trying to bring those budget deficits under control. He served as a deputy majority whip during this time. He chaired the U.S.-Japan Trade Task Force. So again, he has focused his attention not only on the domestic financial situation, but on the interaction in world markets as well. He's been a director of the American Council for Capital Formation. He's been director of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. He's been director of the Overseas Development Council, and he's been chairman of the American Business Conference. So whether we're talking about experience in the public sector or experience in the private sector, Jim Jones is exceptionally well prepared for this post. I would say that if I had to drop a very short list of perhaps half a dozen people that I've served with in the Congress, on the basis of those that would be included on that list who had the greatest intellectual capacity to understand the important issues, the public policy challenges that we're faced in this country, to engage in long-range and conceptual thinking as well as in short-term thinking. And then add to that the practical political skills of making use of that intellectual understanding to cause things to happen. I would put Jim Jones on that very, very short list of exceptional people in terms of intellect and ability and practical political skills. And needless to say, if I were making the same list in terms of personal character and integrity, he would be on that short list as well. So it's a real privilege for me, really, to be able to be here and to join my colleague from Oklahoma, Senator Nichols, in making this bipartisan presentation to the committee on behalf of Jim Jones. We're very, very fortunate that a person of his ability would be willing to make the financial and personal sacrifices necessary to take up this key post at this time. So I heartily recommend him to the committee, and I urge his swift confirmation so that he can be on the job at this crucial period.
Thank you very much, David. Dunn?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Coverdale, I'm like my colleague. I'm happy to be here. I'm also delighted that Senator Bourne made those comments in '93 instead of '86. But I've had the pleasure of knowing our nominee very well for the last several years. I congratulate President Clinton in this nomination. Jim Jones has a very distinguished career, both in public and private service. He has years in working on the Hill, working with the Johnson administration, 14 years in the House of Representatives, including chairman of the Budget Committee. Recently, as chairman and CEO of the American Stock Exchange, I think show that he has a very distinguished and accomplished career. And when I look at ambassadorships and I look at challenges, I certainly see ambassador to Mexico as being one of our greatest challenges. When I look at some of the problems and difficulties and challenges, when we're talking about immigration, legal and illegal immigration, when we're talking about the flow of drugs across our borders, when we talk about poverty, talk about some of the environmental concerns that we have across the borders, we have some real serious challenges. We also have opportunities. And we're trying to alleviate some of the poverty on both sides of the border. We see trade as a real solution, and Jim Jones has a record of being a free trader. And I think that's good news for the United States and good news for Mexico, good news for Canada as well. He also has some additional expertise. He served as director of the Alberta Northeast. That's a U.S.-Canadian consortium. I believe that will enhance his understanding of trade relationships throughout North America. So, Mr. Chairman, it goes without saying, this is a real challenge. Mexico, being a growing country, is striving to increase its quality of living, its standard of living for its people. I again congratulate President Clinton for this nomination. I think Jim Jones will do an outstanding job as our ambassador, and that will be to the mutual benefit of the United States and Mexico.
Thank you very much, and thank you both for those very generous remarks. I began to wonder whether or not you were still with us when I was listening to some of those. Not a eulogy. You're both, I know, very busy, and more than happy to have you stay with us, but I know you have other obligations, and so we appreciate immensely your presence here. All right, very good. All right, well, we'll take both of your opening remarks, statements. Jim, we'll begin with you, and then we'll take your opening statements, and then we'll begin the question.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Coverdale and all the members of the committee, I want to thank you personally for scheduling the hearing today and for all of the assistance you have given in forms and everything else it takes to get an appointment. You and your staffs have been most helpful, and I do appreciate it. And I'm particularly grateful to Senator Boren and Senator Nichols for those generous comments. If someone had said he looks so natural also, I would have known that this was not a live appearance. Their remarks are deeply appreciated, and I enjoyed particularly the time as a member of the Oklahoma congressional delegation, working as a team for Oklahoma. Even though all of us had political differences from time to time, when it came to working as a team, we did that well. And I think the fact that there's a bipartisan introduction today is indicative of a couple of things. Number one, indicative of the unique political system we have in this country. And I think it's also indicative of the United States' view of its relationship with Mexico. It's a bipartisan view, the importance of this relationship, and the need to encourage and enhance that relationship. I'm truly honored to be here today as President Clinton's nominee as United States Ambassador to Mexico. I've introduced my wife, Olivia. She will be a partner in this new assignment if the Senate confirms my nomination. My involvement with Mexico goes back 28 years as a young White House assistant to President Johnson. I was sent to Mexico to arrange the president's trip there in 1965, his first trip outside the United States as president. Over the years, I've been to Mexico many times, both on public policy issues and on business matters. America has no more important bilateral relationship than that with Mexico. As a businessman and as a private citizen, I'm extremely impressed with the reforms that are occurring in Mexico in the Salinas administration. I'm equally impressed with the friendship and cooperation that exists and is growing between our two countries, both internally within Mexico and externally in U.S.-Mexican relations. This is the best I've seen it in the nearly 3 decades of my involvement with Mexican issues. However, there are concerns ahead which must be addressed if both of our nations are to continue to grow, to prosper, and to reach a better quality of life. For example, illegal narcotics is a shared problem. Drugs ruin the lives of far too many people in both countries and foster public corruption and lawlessness. My sense is that cooperation between our nations to seriously impede and hopefully halt narco-trafficking is constantly improving. As ambassador, I would make further improvements in this area a major priority. Environmental hazards also affect both countries. Our 2,000-mile common border does not restrict pollution caused on either side of that border. I'm convinced that both of our governments are committed to an improved environment, and this will be another priority for our next ambassador. But most important and key to helping solve all of these other problems is developing a sound and mutually beneficial commercial relationship. Here, the North American Free Trade Agreement is essential. President Clinton and every president in the United States of both political parties for the past half-century have called for more open trade throughout our hemisphere, beginning with Mexico. They did this because it is in America's own national interest. I fully support the Clinton administration's negotiations for supplemental agreements to the NAFTA on environment and labor standards. And I wholeheartedly endorse the President's commitment to have the NAFTA ratified and ready for implementation by January 1, 1994. As ambassador, I will be vigorous in promoting and defending American commercial activities in Mexico and in working to expand market opportunities and economic growth. Mexico is a regional leader on key issues important to the United States, such as promoting peace in Central America. I would try to build on the cooperation already established to achieve our mutual goals of promoting democracy, human rights, open trade, and narcotics interdiction throughout the region. And finally, I would note that Mexico will elect a new president in August 1994. I will make every effort to establish a good relationship with the next Mexican administration to maintain and advance the prevailing spirit of cooperation. As a private citizen, I've said in speeches that Mexico may be our most important foreign policy issue. If we handle it right, with good judgment, mutual respect, shared aspirations for our people, and a commitment to economic growth, we can be a part of the greatest foreign policy success in this decade. I will work very hard to make that happen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ambassador?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, Senator, repeat how honored I am to be received by you today to help you determine my suitability as ambassador to the Republic of Peru. I want to express my appreciation again to President Clinton for this nomination and to Secretary of State Christopher for the recommendation upon which it was based. I do have a statement. I thought in the interest of time I wouldn't read it, simply enter it
We'll
the
include
record,
it,
sir.
not in any other supporting data in the record.
I did note the question on democracy by Senator Coverdale, and I'd be happy to take that now or in the course of the proceeding.
We'll do in the course of the thing, but any other comments you'd care to make?
No, sir.
Well, very good. Well, thank you very much, and we'll include your statements in the record, and let me just begin again by complimenting you both. Jim, obviously, there are many issues that occur as a result of our relationship with Mexico and obviously the common border, and you've mentioned them in your opening remarks on drugs and immigration being the two that come to mind most immediately. But I would argue, I guess, and I don't think there'd be too much debate about this, that the single most important issue that has to be addressed in the coming weeks and months is the North American Free Trade Agreement. And I'm very interested. There's been a lot of discussion here over the last number of weeks as to timing. I know there have been letters sent from members of the House and apparently a letter being generated from some members in the Senate urging that agreement or consideration of it be delayed until after we have completed work on I think, national health care or other issues. I, for one, would like to see it treated earlier rather than later. But I wonder if you might, at the outset here, give us an indication as to when the President plans to present the legislation to Congress for its consideration.
Well, I don't know when the President plans to present this to the Congress. I've been busily trying to wind up my affairs in New York at the American Stock Exchange and run a business there as well as to get prepared for this. I will tell you that my advice before I had any indication of being appointed ambassador, has been strongly to move ahead with the North American Free Trade Agreement. The American Stock Exchange primarily are companies in the mid-size and the growth area, and they see the tremendous advantages and opportunities to them to grow jobs in the United States and develop markets in Mexico. And from that perspective, it's in our own best interest to move on with it. Secondly, I think this is the kind of issue that can bring about a bipartisan victory for the American people. You've had Republican presidents and Democratic presidents move in this direction and support this, and it seems to me that's what the American people are asking for. Do something that's going to help the country in a bipartisan fashion, and this is a perfect way to do it. So for economic and political and other reasons, I think we ought to move ahead, and I know that the President has said he wants this implemented by January 1, 1994, and others in the administration, so I expect that they will be moving ahead briskly.
Well, let me just take advantage of your presence here and suggest to you that I agree. I think it ought to be earlier rather than later. And I agree with you. I've stated publicly I think this is an agreement that deserves to be approved. I did not support the fast-track process. I don't believe in a fast-track process for bilateral agreements or trilateral agreements. I think for GATT with 107 nations, fast-track is critical. But for a treaty with a neighbor, having a full debate is you eliminate a lot of the problems by engaging in the debate. We will not, of course, have any amendments will be tolerated during the consideration of this agreement. That'll create its own set of problems, in my view, but that's history at this particular point. And I would tell you, I think things look fairly good in the Senate, but I see these letters being circulated. We've got to produce 51 votes in the Senate and 217 in the House, and I don't care how many mid-sized or large businesses, corporations, presidents, former presidents care about it. They don't vote. There are 435 members of the House who vote, and 100 senators who vote. And in my view right now, the politics in this issue are not being handled well at all. I read where Bill Daley may be coming in. I have a high regard for him, know him very well. You know the House very well. You've served up here for 14 years. I would strongly urge that your single priority be this issue, and a determination be made very quickly as to whether or not this is something that could be won. If it's not, and I'll express my own view on this particular point here, it's not necessarily a view of my colleagues, and certainly my colleague from Georgia can express his view. If this is an agreement that cannot be won, if the votes are not there for it, then I don't think it ought to be pursued. I think it ought to be put on the back burner until the votes can be secured for it, because delay is terrible, in my view, but defeat is worse. If this agreement were defeated this fall, for whatever reason, then I think it would be a setback of significant proportions for the United States in this hemisphere. But my fear is that there's sort of charging ahead here on the assumption that the votes are going to be there necessarily, and I'm more confident about the Senate than I am the House. I don't know if you want to share any thoughts on that particular view. And again, this is not necessarily, you're not in charge of all of this, but you're here, and I've been trying to make it at every meeting I could about where I see things politically as they're moving along.
So I will certainly pass along, again, your very strong viewpoint on this. In what briefings I've had so far and the people I've met, for example, Ambassador Gillespie, who is going to be heading up this effort from the State Department level, and in talking to different members of the White House staff, etc., I am totally convinced that of the commitment of this administration, and I do know that they're marching ahead with a campaign effort would be designed to be successful. I think part of the problem is, that I've seen from an outsider's point of view, is the opposition has received the headlines and the stories, and a lot of misinformation has gone into the public debate, and I think a lot of it may be misinformation innocently given. But when say the 400,000 people who have a job today, strictly because there have been lower tariffs in the last 5 years in Mexico, that has created jobs in the United States, 400,000 of those. And when you see what additional jobs can be created in this country, not low-wage but high-wage jobs, I think those kinds of facts will be very, very helpful to the debate.
Well, I don't disagree at all. We need to get that information out, because at this moment the proponents are in very much a defensive position, it seems to me, as I see it. I wonder if you might share with us how this debate, to the extent there is one, is being characterized in Mexico. I'm speaking now generally, not necessarily within the circles of the president or others, but generally how it's being perceived.
Well, I can only give you indirectly and mostly from the business community's point of view. And there is very much a commitment to free market economics as we understand it in Mexico. And in order for it to work, we need to really have a North American trading zone that mutually complements and reinforces each other and is a win-win-win situation. Mm-hmm. And so when the headlines hit Mexico, it creates uncertainty, and it doesn't help the situation at all when the headlines indicate that NAFTA may not pass, etc. So I think we have to keep our eye on what's in the good national interest of the United States, and if we do that and proceed along those lines, it's going to help all three countries.
That's a good way of putting it. Now, there are negotiations ongoing between Mexico and ourselves over these side agreements, particularly in labor and environmental issues, and there are also negotiations with Mexico and Canada on labor and environmental matters. I wonder, we seem to get a fairly good report on what's happening on our negotiations. I wonder if you can shed any light as to how the negotiations are proceeding between Mexico and Canada on their side agreements. Is there a point here in which we're dealing with potentially different conclusions?
I really can't give you any particular insights, Mr. Chairman, even on the U.S.-Mexico bilateral agreements. I did not think it would be appropriate to get into some of the governmental discussions when I'm not officially a part of the government.
Well, I appreciate that answer, but let me make the request, and whether or not through you or through others, that we be kept abreast. I'd like to be kept abreast almost on a weekly basis on this. We're getting down, if we're going to start dealing with this fall. It seems to me that we ought to be kept appraised as to how those are proceeding. And so I'll leave that block of questions open, but I know that there are good members of the administration sitting with us here today, and I'm sure they'll carry that message back. What about your assessment of, or how you would assess, I guess, the level of cooperation between our two countries on other bilateral issues, drugs and immigration? I mentioned earlier the ones that come to mind most immediately. And how are they in any way impacting the debate over NAFTA?
My sense is, again, from the private sector perspective, is that the degree of cooperation between our two countries in these other areas, non-commercial areas, is rapidly improving. I sense that in terms of law enforcement type issues. Different law enforcement agencies in the United States seem to be working ever more closely with similar law enforcement agencies in Mexico. They've established a new institute down there with a lot of cooperation from the United States to deal with drug trafficking, narcotics issues, and enforcement issues. And so my sense is that there is a considerable amount of cooperation, and it's improving. The same is true in the environmental area. I get this from people who report to me from the business sector of cooperative efforts in trying to clean up the environment, not only on the border, but inland in both areas. So, as I say, I've been I've had dealings there for 28 years, and I've never seen it better, and never seen a greater willingness to want to even improve it even more.
It's good to hear. Let me ask two additional questions, then turn to my colleague from Georgia. One is on the campaign finance reform. It's been reported that President Salinas solicited from some of the wealthiest business people in Mexico contributions in the neighborhood of $25 million apiece. Now, I'm saying that's reported in the press. In response to the concerns over that, campaign finance reform, which has been the subject of no small debate here over the number of years, we're still in the throes of it. But to what extent has campaign finance reform, the efforts of President Salinas, been accepted, and how likely are we to see that fairly soon?
Well, campaign finance reform is a difficult issue in both countries, as we both know. I saw the story in the paper, and other than that, I have no knowledge one way or the other, and I learned a long time ago not to take full value of everything I read in a periodical. I think that from what I know of some of the reforms, I think they're incredible. For example, the photo identification, where the voters in Mexico with voter rolls will be able to be tracked in such a way that has a significant impact on honesty in elections and things like that. So again, I'm relying mostly on public periodicals, but from what I read and putting my former political hat on, I think they've made remarkable progress in the reforms that they've recommended and those that they're putting into effect.
Well, we might keep us posted on that as well as they pursue. And lastly, there was a tremendous amount of notoriety associated with the kidnapping of an official that we suspected being involved in the 1985 torture and murder of drug enforcement agent Enrique Camarena. And obviously all of us are horrified over that event. That is the torture and death of Enrique Camarena. The decision was made to go after this individual and bring him to the United States, and the Supreme Court upheld that particular effort. The Mexican authorities, some have moved to propose to suggest to renegotiate the extradition treaty between our two countries. I wonder whether or not the Clinton administration is receptive to that idea or not at all.
Again, I believe, I'm relying a little bit on what I've read, I believe both President Bush and President Clinton have said that they would not have another extradition in that same fashion, kidnapping or however you want to word it. And I believe that they are having talks of some sort. What are the nature of those talks, I don't know. But I believe President Clinton has indicated, or at least the administration has indicated they're willing to talk about this issue.
But no agreement on whether or not to proceed with an extradition treaty.
I really am going to have to pass on the question because I don't have enough information to know.
Congressman, I know that having been through one of these once before myself. That's correct.
See, it's easier to get elected.
Very unnerving. In the time you've had to think about, your watch, so to speak, what would be the 3 or 4 things when it's over you'd like to be able to say were achieved?
I think first and foremost is that I would have been able to make a contribution to improving the quality of life in both the United States and Mexico. And to me, you do that by expanding the economic pie in both countries so that citizens in both countries have job opportunities where they live and job opportunities that will improve their standard of living. Secondly, that we work cooperatively to fight corruption and lawlessness in any form in both countries. And third, that we pass along to the citizens of both of our countries, particularly the future citizens, a cleaner environment so that they can have a healthy life. That is a lot to try to accomplish. But I think we're right at the cusp of creating that kind of relationship and that kind of improvement. And I would hope that I could make a positive contribution to it.
Appreciate that. Being experienced in both business and political endeavors, you would be cognizant that it's always necessary to have an alternative plan. You may be offering a new concept or a new product or a new view, and in that it's all very unpredictable, to say, what will I do if something goes awry or changes? Now, the current data, and I believe I'm comfortable that it's certifiable, suggests that 50% of the public of the United States do not know what NAFTA is. Of the 50% that do know, they are opposed to it 2-1.
This is Georgia?
This is national.
National.
It is also
Wasn't aware of
Georgia.
that, but I-
It's also Georgia. Now, to lay out, those are not particularly surprising numbers to me, because NAFTA is not the kind of thing that probably everybody sits around talking about over coffee in the morning at the
Sounds like
cafe.
coffee.
Well, somebody said it was an automotive distribution center in some of the... Now, given these worrisome signals, it seems to me that someone needs to be giving some thought to what alternatives may or may not be, and that there would be some consciousness of preparing that in the event it were not successful, then the responsibilities that you have multiply. I mean, it's difficult in any circumstance, but becomes inordinately so if that were to be the case. And I wondered if you have had a chance to give that any thought as to what some of the alternatives we would pursue would be, or whether you've had any discussions of that nature, not to compromise by any stretch of imagination the President's commitment to the concept.
Well, let me make two comments. Number one, I saw a poll last week. I believe David Sawyer sent it to me, so I don't remember who the pollster was. But it was more encouraging than the previous one that I had seen, which you cited. And that indicated that of roughly the half the people who knew anything about NAFTA, it was roughly even, like it was 43 to 39%, something like that. So the attitudes are evening up as I hope information gets out. The second point I would make is to alternative plans. Obviously, I have not been able to think in great detail what would be done if the best plan doesn't work. But I'm thinking, what are the alternatives? You do that in any good business or political operation. But to me, if you're putting a new product or you're manufacturing something and you believe in it strongly, and you think it's the best product, then you have to go with it all the way. And I think that's what we have to do. And I believe this is a good product for both of our countries, all three of our countries, and we need to push it full speed.
Okay, well, my only suggestion is that somewhere in the inner workings there needs to be a folder marked option B.
Sure.
And so that you're not, or we're not, flat in the event the best were not possible.
Very, very good.
Another question: when I was director of the Peace Corps, we really were fortunate to redefine the nature of that partnership. In particular, we found ourselves in European countries for the first time, the Soviet sphere, and of equal importance, Argentina. There were limited discussions with regard to possibilities that would exist in the growing partnership between Mexico and the United States, and any role that this institution could play and it was a little bit like running into a stone wall. I was particularly concerned about our border activities and even suggested the possibility of a partnership where Americans and Mexicans work together with regard to the barrios and particular circumstances that exist on our borders. That maybe that could be the target of the focus. You've talked about quality of life and the environment, all of which fall under the jurisdiction of this institution. So if I could just leave you with this thought and ask that you put it maybe as 4B, as something that is within the grasp of both countries, both entirely capable of pursuing this interaction, and I think it merits more attention. I suspect that the reason there was a resistance was because of the traditional view that it is a charity and that it was beneath the standing of Mexico to. I think we've about erased that concept, and I would hope that you would revisit it on your watch.
I think it's a good suggestion, and I will indeed do that, Senator. And I had lunch today with.
Jim, would you pull that microphone a little closer?
I had lunch today with a group that included the mayor of Laredo, Texas, and he was recounting the various cooperative efforts that may not be under the Peace Corps rubric, but certainly under the same general aims that his community and his counterpart across the border that they are doing together. And so I think that's a very good suggestion. I'll explore it further.
My last question to elaborate on that idea, the Peace Corps has also inaugurated a program called Return Peace Corps Volunteers USA. This program envisions returning volunteers returning to American universities to pursue an advanced degree in education in exchange for working in at-risk situations in our own country. And these barrios and border issues were a target. I think Texas Tech at El Paso is involved with the project. Reader's Digest has just funded 800 scholarships at about $6 to $7 million. I would ask that you become familiar with that program and again, the potential that it would have to border issues.
I thank you, Senator. I will do that. Thank you.
I have no further.
Senator Zarwitz.
Mr. Chairman, I'd be very brief. I really have to chair another hearing, but I really just came to add my very strong support to the nomination of Jim Jones to be our ambassador to Mexico. I think, I hope it's appreciated in Mexico that the quality they're getting with this ambassadorial nomination. A long-term member of the Congress, including service on the House Ways and Means Committee, where almost all the important decisions are made. Not all, but almost all of the important decisions are made. Chairman of the Budget Committee. He's been the head of the chairman of the American Stock Exchange over the last 4 years, and by all accounts from every source has done a really absolutely first-rate job. Earlier than that, before all of this, he had important tenure serving in the White House during the time when President Johnson was the chief executive. So we're pleased to see him go to take on this very important assignment with a very important neighbor and friend, and I simply wanted to come, since we've known each other for a very long time, to wish him well.
Thank you very much.
If you'll excuse me, I'll go chair my other hearing, which is about to start.
You're excused. Thank you very much. Let me, if I can, Mr. Adams, turn to you. You've got a very difficult post, but as you pointed out, you're no stranger to difficult posts at all. I suspect in no small measure your selection to go here was in fact because you had some experience in dealing with these other types of questions. And let me just begin by stating to you what I'm sure is already clear to you. I'm not stating it because there's any question in my own mind, you don't appreciate this. We here in the Congress have a deep interest in these issues, and I know for myself, I know Senator Coverdale and others do everything we can to be cooperative and helpful in trying to fashion policies, regardless of the administration that it may be in, so that we're not off going in different directions. From time to time that may happen, where the executive branch and the Congress disagree, but I think every effort ought to be made to try and have us all singing out of the same hymn book in our conduct of our foreign policy. But given the historic nature of the separation of powers, that isn't always achievable, as we've seen. I would argue that in many cases it wasn't achieved because people didn't try, in many cases, where too often the executive branch will make a decision, does so in a vacuum, on the assumption that the Congress would not go along or understand, where a mere effort to try and bring them along and work out whatever may have been some concerns could achieve the tremendously added impact of a decision that has the imprimatur, if not 100% of the Congress, a significant portion. And I've always felt that people who are sensitive to the American decision-making process, that result is one that you have to take a lot more note of. Not that you don't take note of an executive decision, but one where it has both the executive and legislative branch working together, it can be tremendously effective in achieving desired results. And would just raise that as an observation. Obviously, in Peru, here there's a difficult question, and it's not a simple one, but it's one where you don't want to lose sight of principles as you try and grapple with day-to-day problems here. And there we've seen some very strong autocratic tendencies on the part of the Fujimori government. And lately we've seen a real effort, I think, or at least I hope it's real, to move away from those tendencies back towards more democratic principles here. Now you're faced with a staggering terrorism problem, but I wonder if you might share with us what your assessment is of the sincerity of this move back, or are we looking here at a situation where aid hangs in the balance, efforts are made to sort of bring this thing back at the aid, and then the real tendencies are to again, to go back to the autocratic approaches. And I wonder if you might share with us your assessment of that.
Thank you, Senator. I simply like you to know that I took very careful note of the point about the importance and the extra value of decisions that carry the weight of the executive and the legislature.
Appreciate it.
I can certainly speak to that from my prior experience in Haiti. I think there we had a bipartisan policy, and a policy that was very much shared by both branches of government, and we can move mountains, gentlemen, if that is the case.
I agree.
With respect to your question, Senator, time, frankly, will tell where we will be in Peru on the issue of democracy in 3 years' time. I do think we are substantially ahead of where we were a year and some months ago after the auto golpe conducted by President Fujimori on April 5th. I think some of the measures of progress are two elections, one for the Constituent Assembly in November of this past year, and one for the municipalities. I think both of those were observed by the OAS, and both concluded that the electoral processes were fair and objective, although there were some at the edges, some raggedness with respect to logistics. I think in terms of the results, they're interesting also when you talk about democracy. Fujimori's party won 44 of 80 seats available in the National Assembly, the Constituent Assembly, and won, as I recall, only one of its slates, won in the municipality elections out of many, many hundreds. I think those two events are measures of some progress, as well as the drafting of a constitution, which is now about, I believe, to emerge from the Constituent Assembly. Our understanding is it's to be put to a vote of the people in a referendum. We very much hope that the product will be one which will allow for full autonomy of the judicial branch with respect to the executive, as I believe that, getting to your question, Senator, is one of the key hallmarks in democracy.
Should the absence of major party participation in those elections, how do we read that?
Well, you're referring to the absence of Acción Popular and APRA, two major parties. We could speculate as to why they did not play an active role in the elections. You're correct. They boycotted them. Some would argue that they boycotted them because they felt that the rules of the road were not fair. Others would analyze their decision not to participate as perhaps reflecting the kind of results they feared might emerge from the elections. In other words, that they would not perform very well. I'd point out that President Fujimori has a 67% popularity rating right now, I think, as we speak, which is a rather astounding
I remember recent
figure.
presidential elections where a year out, another president had favor. We got to be careful of those polls.
Absolutely. I'd point out also that President Fujimori's predecessor, President Garcia, I understand, had a 70% rating.
Is that the same polling company they had?
And with 3 months, it went down to 9%. But something happened in between that was fairly disastrous. Nationalizations of the banking system.
Well, I just I guess what I'm maybe asking you for here is to share with us some standards and that Senator Coverdale and I and our colleagues maybe should have as sort of some benchmarks or road signs in these next couple of years as we're watching this. What should we sort of be looking for? What would you and I'm asking you here in this setting, and you obviously may need more time. I'd like to respond to this in a different way, but to give us a general idea, what you would think we ought to be sort of using as benchmarks to determine whether or not this progress is in fact real and things we ought to look for.
Well, I think short term, I think you want to look in the next couple of months, in fact, at what is happening with respect to that Constitution, to the provisions that relate to the judiciary, the provisions which relate to the presidency. I think beyond that, you want to look at how fair was the referendum process by which that Constitution was adopted. But clearly, there are many other measures to look to the further out you go in the process. They deal not only with the balance of respective powers, but also questions such as due process in the judiciary, how they deal with terrorists who've been arrested in the course of the violence that now characterizes so much of Peru. I think further out still, you want to look at the presidential election process. Is that process a fair process when that is scheduled currently to be in 2 years' time, or is it one characterized by fraud or by heavy-handedness on the part of the executive branch? Those are a few of the measures we might wanting to look at. They include as well human rights. Human rights with respect to the issue of disappeareds and those who have been killed. A very important issue. I would say there's no issue more important to us in Peru than that. There are many other issues, I will tell you, that we must attend to, and I would, as ambassador, if confirmed. Narcotics, very clearly, and economic performance. The country is going through a major overhaul in its economic structure, a major reform program, and at the cost of a very significant recession. Some people talk about Peru in terms of a country which is going through the equivalent of our Civil War and our recession and our prohibition all at the same time, with all of the violence associated with that. So the country faces tremendous challenges, and a key challenge in all of this is to develop the democratic consensus and stability to undergird policy choices for more than just the moment that will carry the public and the government through in a longer term period of time, so that the choices made today will pertain tomorrow and the day after, as they must if you wish to obtain the stability that you need for economic growth.
I received a note here from my staff that said, do you think if President Clinton were to shut down the Congress, his poll numbers might not go up as well?
I would defer to you, sir, Senator.
I wasn't going to mention it at all because I think we all know the answer to that. We have some conditions already on our economic assistance, on our aid to Peru. Would you be recommending to the administration or to us any additional conditionality at this juncture?
Well, sir, I think you're referring to the conditionality that was attached to, I believe, the FY91 funds. And I think our view is that the government of Peru, with respect to the ESF portions of those funds, has met the conditionality then obtaining. Some things have happened, obviously, since then. And I think it's our view that assistance should be extended to this country and many others, clearly linked to our key policy objectives. I think our sense of it as well is that the Peruvians have established a rather credible record with respect to the conditionality or the undertakings that they have offered us. I think I'd go back to the undertakings, for example, that were made at the end of February by the Minister of Justice with respect to human rights. That was a key element in the movement forward on the very important bridging loan extended by the United States, which permitted Peru to reintegrate itself into the world financial community. And those undertakings included the readmission of the ICRC to all places of detention in Peru, a statement to the effect that the human rights groups in Peru were vital for the maintenance and strengthening of democracy, and a number of other elements which I think, in fact, have been observed. I think I'd look to the future, Senator, at some other areas of interest. I think I'd share with you our interest in seeing continued progress with respect to killing and disappeared, and there has been very significant progress in the past 8 or so months with respect to the number of those who've been disappeared and killed. Our sense of it, in fact, is that it's 50% at least less than where we were last year. And this is not just me saying that. I think it is as well the Peruvian human rights groups themselves, and Senator Bernales, who is a key human rights watcher, violence watcher in Peru. I think we want to see a continued progress in that area. I think we'd want to see the access by additional NGOs to places of detention in the country. I think we'd like to see progress with respect to the investigation of one particularly heinous incident of human rights abuse, and I refer to the Cantuta killings, La Cantuta University outside Lima, in which I believe 9 students and 1 professor disappeared. There's some indications, although we're not convinced that this is the case, some indications that some of the remains of these individuals were found recently in a bone pit in the general area. But again, this is not confirmed. We would like to see movement by the Peruvians at some point in accepting forensic assistance. We have offered, and other bodies have offered as well, to help them identify. And I think there are ways that forensic evidence, that forensic assistance can be accepted with full respect to Peruvian sovereignty and nationally. I worked for a while in my previous career experiences in the Office of Counterterrorism, and there were a number of occasions where we offered forensic assistance involving deaths of Americans, and ways were found to make this an appropriate part of the investigation.
I appreciate that, and again, I think it's always difficult, these approaches, you know, whether or not you carrots and sticks, and I don't even like to use those words, frankly, because there's a certain arrogance associated with them, but a pretty good list. Let me stop there and turn to my colleague from Georgia. Paul?
Oh, I'll be reasonably brief. I think that this dialogue has gotten to some of the critical issues. I would like to give you the same chance I gave the congressman to sort of capsulize, if you could, where you'd like what the report would read at the end of this watch.
Thank you, Senator. I think just as my colleague, I'd like it said that we made a difference for the better in the lives of average Peruvians, as well as in the completeness of the political life with respect to democracy and human rights. Very clearly, what good is done while I'm in Peru, assuming that I will be in Peru, is not so much what I do or what the United States does, it's what the Peruvians themselves do in consensus among themselves. This is something I've learned in previous experiences in my life, and something I'd share with you today, that we do not prevail because we say so. We prevail if we're effective because we're agents of catalytic change. And we talk with people, and we ask questions, and we offer our help and support. And I think if there is good that then comes, it's a measure of our effectiveness in helping pull together areas of consensus and sustaining proper policy choices, for example, in the area of economic performance. It's absolutely vital that Peru managed to sustain a rate of growth over the next number of years to provide employment and to provide hope, basically. And that hope, I think, will be as strong as any arm that can be brought to bear by the armed forces in turning back the Sendero Luminoso and in encouraging those now planting coca to plant something else. So I would look to the element of hope, which I think is there today, as opposed to where Peru was a couple of years ago, a sense of confidence and a sense that the invincibility of the forces arrayed against the elected authorities of Peru has now been broken, and that I hope we will see this momentum built upon to create further concrete gains on economic performance, on human rights, with respect to cooperation in the important area of narcotics.
Some would suggest that the actions by President Fujimori have left a mark that is unacceptable in the context of the formulation of democracy. How do you get comfortable with this piece of history insofar as our role and the message for the formulation of democracy in this hemisphere?
More broadly in the hemisphere. Well, I have to say I am, and we, the United States government, were and are uncomfortable with what happened, very uncomfortable with what happened on the 5th of April. It sends a very bad signal. But I do think that signal with respect to the need to resort to extra constitutional means to work your will. I think that signal was blunted with the example of Guatemala. And I think the message then that comes through is that what happened in Peru is probably relevant only to Peru. And it happened in Peru in large part because of the conjuncture of a massive economic failure, a massive terroristic challenge, and a massive narco-trafficking problem. I think, therefore, that what happened in Peru, I trust, will not be seen elsewhere, because I don't think you have that combination of problems. Peru is unique, I think, in that regard, the intensity of these problems.
You do see, though, how it could get translated into other...
I could, for example.
So would that then, for all of us, put special burdens on the progress?
Indeed it would. But I do think, Senator, that, as I was saying earlier, it could be translated into action by other countries, but if those countries or leaders tried to follow the example of Peru, I think they would be met with the same response from the public as was the case in Guatemala. Because I don't think this experience is an example that will be followed. It can be followed successfully by countries other than Peru, because you don't have that same almost unique combination of circumstances.
I would think also that there might be some message in the measure the other day on Nicaragua in terms of the legislative body's exasperation when a failure of progress seems to repeat itself on a regular basis. Let me move to one specific question, then I'll conclude on this incident regarding the American aircraft. There's a loss of an American
Yes, sir.
servicemen, 2 wounded, and we've been pressing for compensation. Do you know the status of those negotiations? Are they near resolution? Have they been resolved?
Well, sir, I think I don't have a very close knowledge of where we stand on the issue. I do know that we have asked for compensation. I know that we have followed it up on numerous occasions. I have the sense that we're not by any means at the end of the road here. I have the sense that there is a prospect, that there are prospects there. And I think I'll just leave it at that. I would like to have the opportunity, with your concurrence, to be able to work on this issue myself.
Okay, I might, if the chairman would permit, let that conduct itself in the form of a formal question in writing we would submit, so that would give you time to further investigate the matter, and that there might be a formal response on that issue. And with that, I conclude my question.
Thank you very much. I'm looking here, Ambassador Adams, at a lawyers' committee concerns regarding Peru's anti-terrorism courts and the administration of justice since April of '92. This date on this is July 29th. Came out last week. Have you seen this?
I don't believe so, sir.
Well,
It's very recent then.
yeah, it came out last week. It's highly critical of Peru's anti-terrorism courts and the administration of justice there generally. I'm going to put this in the record. I'd ask you, there are conclusions on here in the back and some observations, and I would just ask you to take a look at it if you would. I'm sure you probably would see it sooner rather than later anyway. And it really goes to some of the questions we talked about generally, and I think you highlighted some of the things we ought to be watching. The administration, certainly you ought to be watching down there with regard to the human rights issue. And just to reiterate the point, I mean, we take it very, very seriously here. I mean, I would say to you what we've said to others. You know, even if these issues didn't exist, the issue of aid right now, given economic concerns, we've got a staggering problem in the midwestern part of our country today. It will cost us billions of dollars, already estimates in the $4 or $5 billion range. I suspect it'll get worse. There are countless other problems that need addressing here at home, and there's a high degree of frustration. Senator Coverdale mentioned the numbers among those who are familiar with what NAFTA is and how they're responding to it, and and I think that again reflects their own sense of insecurity about their economic future more than anything else, and more susceptible to the kind of superficial criticisms that people like Ross Perot and others are bringing to bear on these issues. But nonetheless, they're there. I say that to you because in the context of that, if there are any problems at all that have some degree of legitimacy, it's just too easy to walk away. And I'm not proud of that fact necessarily, but I've seen it happen over and over again. And I just think you have to be aware of it. And as you're talking to people in Peru who are doing their best down there, I don't think it's harmful to let them know what we're dealing with up here, that foreign aid is the easiest budget to cut. It takes no imagination whatsoever to cut it. I'm always stunned by the lack of awareness of what percentage of our budget is and how we rank at the bottom of all industrialized nations as a percentage of our gross national product that Americans contribute in the world, at the bottom.
Yes.
Now, that dollar amount, it's more than most, but our gross national product is stronger. Most Americans think it's 10 or 15 or 20%. I get wild answers to that question. But when you realistically say it's, well, 1%, they don't believe you anyway. I mean, I don't care if you cite chapter and verse on it. That's right. You don't have it. You have it all wrong. So it's hard enough. And again, I just using the opportunity here today in these hearings to ask you, and I'm confident you will, to convey that under the best of circumstances, it's going to be difficult. But if there is a continued deterioration of human rights, abuses and problems, people don't want their taxpayer money. It's hard enough to go someplace where it's deserving. To a place where it isn't deserving is easy. We just write that one right off. We just move on. And my hope is that those responsible down there will appreciate that. So I'll put this in the record and ask you to take a look at it.
Certainly convey your sense to the authorities. Again, if I've confirmed it, only make, I suppose, the plea that in the lightness of day and a full examination of our interests, which are many in Peru, that we find a way whereby we can accompany those people and those authorities in a relationship which is cooperative with those things that concern us most. Yes, human rights very importantly, but also the narcotics trade, which we spend some $40 billion a year in terms of the consumer. My goodness, that's twice what the stamp program is, I think, for the United States.
Sure.
So we're looking for a relationship which is supportive but not partisan, which is cooperative but without a sense of complacency, one that is honest, one that is efficient, and one that looks to getting shared goals worked on in concrete ways with results.
I agree with that. Senator Coverdale has asked you about the C-130 tragedy, and we'll wait for your response on that. I'd like you to just come back, if you could, with us on the whole, the drug trafficking issue and the problems associated with it. Is there still a problem with the Peruvian military being directly involved in drug trafficking, in your estimation?
Well, again, I don't have a direct knowledge. My sense of it is there are isolated instances of that. I think at the same time, there is a much more evident political will being shown by the Peruvian authorities in cooperating with us for their own reasons as well in the fight against narcotics. One fact is that the Sendero Luminoso earns very significant funds from the narcotics trade in the Upper Huallaga, some $30 to $40 million. It's one of the best financed political, if you will, phenomenon, a terrorist phenomenon in the world. And among the things that you would see then as signs of this political will are the deployment of Peruvian Air Force assets in the Upper Huallaga Valley. I think there have been some 64 aircraft that have been forced down in the course of the past year. I think there have been 5 or 6 that in fact have been shot down or shot up on the ground. I think you've seen the passage of the Vienna Convention, laws on asset seizure, money laundering, and chemical control in the country. I think you've seen a doubling in the seizures of chemical products used in the processing of the cocoa leaf. I think you've seen some action with respect to corruption. For example, my understanding is that the chief of the narcotics police, in fact, Durandro, which is the unit down there, has been suspended on suspicion for having been part of an effort wrongly to seek the liberation of someone rightfully suspected of narcotics involvement. So there are a number of things that you can point to. In addition, after President Fujimori became president, I think there were some 500 or so police officers who were removed. And the year after that, I think there was some 350 to 400. I think you see quite a bit of movement these days, the kinds of things that we were hoping would have been possible to do a couple of years ago. And I'm sorry to say that perhaps we've lost a couple of years' time. And I'm sorry to say as well that the amount of support we have been able to provide Peru has been significantly affected by that lag as well as by the performance on human rights. But the result has been that the funds available to Peru are significantly less than what has been dispersed to the other countries in the Andean region. And I think with respect to the gains we see today, I think an analysis might well prove that they are reasonably cost effective.
What about the development of alternatives? I mean, this worked very well in, I guess it was Turkey a number of years ago. Very effective, in fact. And I'm told, I don't know how accurate this is, that actually heroin use is on a dramatic increase in this country.
That's my understanding as well, Senator. I think some, 25% of the heroin that's consumed in the United States today now comes from South America. I think mostly it comes from Colombia, despite the efforts of that country to eradicate. But alternative development is a very important concept. And I think it is one not only that President Fujimori very much favors, but I believe we do and would as well if we had the funds. And I hope very much that this branch of government will see a way to make that happen with respect to some ESF in the amount of, I think, $22.5 million would be enough, we think, over several years to mount a credible alternative development program together with a corresponding amount of money in PO4D counterpart. I think my view of it is that a counter-narcotics program doesn't make any sense without alternative development. And I don't think you have to offer dollar for dollar to the peasant growing the cocoa the same amount of profit growing some other commodity. I think what goes on in the minds of people growing cocoa is not just the profit motive, but also, my goodness, 90% of them were surveyed, I think, by AID in one part of the Upper Wyalga Valley and said, my goodness, if we had a choice, we'd get out of this business. We don't like the smell of kerosene. We don't like to use the acids that we have to. We don't care for the turmoil in our lives. We don't care for the Sendero Luminoso being the middleman. We don't care for the Colombians. Basta, thank you very much. If we could get out of this. So I think if you could come up with a package of development, small-scale development projects, extension services, roads, very importantly, bridging over those roads, schooling, I think you could, in fact, move a number of these people away from reliance upon coca. There is, in fact, a small experimental project now going on in the Upper Wyalga Valley, I think in the area of the Pananza Valley. And people who work on this project, American aid workers who are out there, not just sitting in the offices in Lima, but actually out there, tell me that in the past 9 months, there's been a very significant drop in the production of coca base, which is a key first step in this movement. So I'd kind of make a plea to you, Senator, that we'd be able to provide some funds in this area. It takes CSF and counterpart funds. Give me some time down there, and we can work something out.
I'm just curious, because this is not a... it used to be the United States was almost the exclusive market, but that's no longer the case. In fact, markets are developing within these countries themselves, and I don't know to what extent it's becoming a problem in some of our industrialized allies in the Pacific Rim or in the European community and elsewhere, but it always seems we're asked to bear the greatest burden in all of this, and yet there are others who are suffering and will continue, and the problem will grow, I gather.
Very much so, Senator. I think the European community has organized something called the Dublin Group, which is a special subset of experts and authorities on narcotics. We are very interested in involving the Europeans much more, and the multilateral development agencies much more. The World Bank, the IDB, for example, in alternative development. But even so, I think we need to take the lead, and to take the lead, we have to show some money. I think the problem is serious in Japan. It's serious in Europe. Even in Peru. I mean, I've seen data that suggests that high school males, almost 40%, have tried the base product in this cocaine chain. It's not to say that everybody's addicted by any means, but it's just a terrible exposure.
Well, I'd urge you to pursue that. Maybe give us some ideas and thoughts on how we might secure some additional support and backing from that, from other nations where the problem may not be as great as ours, but it's growing, and it seems to me it's in everyone's interest to support those efforts. Well, listen, I'm sure there are probably additional questions. We could spend a good part of the day or week on either one of these countries. There are so many issues, but again, let me end where I've begun. I think the President has made a great choice, and both of you. Jim, we're gonna have a Spanish test for you in about 6 months. I mean, and I understand you're a very good linguist and that actually learned patois in Haiti.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Patois is a wonderful expression. It's not my fault.
Yeah. Well, I served in my Peace Corps duty right on the border, near the border with Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and so I've spent a great deal of time and a lot of good friends in Haiti over the years, and I admire your ability to learn that. It's critical. That is the language that is critically important. And I just feel very strongly that in this hemisphere, there's no excuse why our ambassadors aren't completely fluent in the native languages, and I'm confident that you will be very shortly, and you already are in Spanish, I gather. So with that, we'll terminate these hearings and look forward to working with both of you in the coming months. A lot of tough work in front of us, but some wonderful opportunities as well.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both. This committee will stand adjourned until further call to the chair. Thank you, Paul.
Lee, just for the record, Senator Helms has two statements to be included in the record.
Does he have questions also?
I didn't see anything. Debbie, any questions?
No.
Send your questions or comments on this confirmation hearing to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, 446 Dirksen Senate Office Building, Washington, D.C., 20510 is the zip code.
C-SPAN 2 and its companion network C-SPAN are funded entirely by America's cable television companies as a public service.
We're pausing now to update our overnight programming for you. Please keep in mind that the times mentioned here are all Eastern times only. Next on C-SPAN 2, it's our Monday morning Events in the News call-in program. Joining us Monday morning were Clarence Page of the Chicago Tribune and Andrew Sullivan of the New Republic. At 4:45 a.m., we're going to show you some debate from Monday on the floor of the Senate concerning the nominee to chair the National Endowment for the Humanities, Sheldon Hackney. At 5:55 a.m., it's the National Conference of the National Urban League. This portion of the conference